Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look and installing the Demco Air Force One supplemental braking system on a 2023 Jeep Wrangler. When it comes to braking systems and flat-toned vehicle, you do have a bunch of different options, whether it be portable or fixed. On the fixed systems, it's really nice to be able to just plug in and be ready to go. There's no setting up, there's nothing that you have to store, and that's the great part about this Air Force One. Once it's all installed, you'll just have to hook up your components. There's no adjusting necessary. You get your vehicle in flat tow mode and you're ready to hit the road. Now, this is only for air brakes, so if you have electric over hydraulic or just normal brakes, you're going to want to look at the Demco Stay and Play Duo. It's a very good system, uses a very similar style mounting and brake actuating, and they're generally very reliable, and the Air Force One is exactly the same as far as that reliability and longevity. So this is a great system. So if you have a coach with air brakes, it's definitely the one that I would prefer. So if you have one of these big boys and you need to get to stopping, you're going to want to look at the Air Force One. When it comes to flat towing any vehicle, there's going to be 5 main components that are going to be required. And the first one, starting on the vehicle side, we can see here is our base plate. And this is going to structurally attach to the frame of the vehicle, creating a mounting point for the rest of our flat tow components and allows you to tow it down the road. Connected to our base plate, we have our tow bar. And that's the physical connection between the base plate and the hitch on the RV. Today we have the Roadmaster Nighthawk, great tow bar, and that will come with some of the other components like our diode wiring, which will transmit the light signals from your RV to the lights on the towed vehicle, giving you your running lights, your brake lights, and turn signals. We also have a supplemental braking system. So that's what we have here is our breakaway switch. So in case of a catastrophic disconnect, it's going to pull that cable, applying the brakes on the vehicle. In our case today, we do have air brakes. We use the Demco Air Force One. So we have this air line that's going to transmit that air pressure to the cylinder, applying the brakes. And just like you would on a trailer, you also have safety cables that are going to attach to the hitch on the RV as well as the base plate. And that's going to keep everything together just in case the tow bar was to fail. For your braking systems, a lot of times people stray away from the fixed ones because they're afraid of the installation process, and that's not really the case here. You don't have to be a wiring expert. There is some things that may make you a little bit afraid as far as cutting into your booster line, but I'm here to tell you I've done tons of these installs and they're really not too scary to do. If this is beyond your scope, you might want to take a look at our dealer network through eTrailer, and that way you can find somewhere close to you to have that installed. But if you do want to figure out how to do this yourself, I'm right here along with you. So I'm going to break down the components of the braking system and kind of lay them out in the vehicle and then walk you through step by step to make sure you get yours installed. So let's take a look. Now, when it comes to the installation on any permanent braking system, it can get a little bit involved, and it's definitely something you're going to want to do when you have your base plate being installed. Generally, you'll have your bumper off, and that's the case that we have here. That just makes it easier to mount everything up on the vehicle and get everything routed. And that's really the hardest part of installing this braking system, is making sure that you have everything in the right spot and then just making the connections between them and getting a nice clean routing job in the process. And we've done plenty of permanent brake installs here, so I'm going to break you down to where I'm going to be putting the components, and that way you can mount yours up in a similar spot, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to make the connections between them all. Now, taking a look at each individual component, this will just be the vehicle side, because later we'll be installing the RV side to make sure that everything plays ball. And so with every braking system, you're going to have a breakaway switch, and this will mount up on your base plate. In fact, today we have a Blue Ox base plate that has a mounting tab for this, and this should be on the front of the vehicle because this orange cable will go to the hitch on the RV, and in case of a catastrophic disconnect where all of your connections failed, it'll pull this, applying the brakes on the towed vehicle, which will bring it to a stop. That way it's not rolling down the highway. So this has 2 wires off of it, an orange and a black. And that's the great part about this Air Force One. There's not a ton of wiring when it comes to it. There are going to be some airline routing that we're going to have to do, but we'll come back to that. So with our breakaway switch on the front, we also have our air fitting, and this is going to be the smaller diameter push connect fitting. There's a larger one that's going to go on the RV, and we're going to be using the coiled blue quick connect fitting. That's going to run from the towed vehicle to the air fitting on the RV, and that way the air can transfer through here and eventually apply the brakes. This has 2 holes here. Generally, you can find a nice part to mount this up. You could probably fabricate something up. You can use the bracket that your 6-pole mounts off of. So pretty much anywhere up front where you can mount it, where it's going to be nice and secure. A lot of times I'll try to keep it on the same side of the vehicle as where you have the air fitting on the RV. So if it's on the driver's side, keep it there. That way your coil's not going across. So we'll get this mounted up somewhere up front here. And we do have this push connect fitting. That's where our 1/4-inch airline tube is going to go. And this will eventually route up to our main unit. Our main unit is kind of the brains of the operation, and this is where all of our connections really feed into at some point. So this large barb fitting is going to be a larger diameter hose that will eventually tie into our brake booster line, and that's going to have a one-way check valve, so we're not pulling any suction from the engine, but that's going to allow that vacuum to be able to work as the air pressure goes in and out. Speaking of that, the air in, we mentioned that push connect fitting up front with the quick connect. That 1/4-inch air line from that fitting is going to route up here eventually to the air in. The air out is going to run inside the vehicle and go to our brake cylinder. We also have 2 wires here. One of these is going to attach to our breakaway switch eventually, and the other one's going to get grounded. So again, this is not a super high when it comes to electrical wiring install to do. This one's actually pretty simple in reference to other braking systems that do require a little bit more wiring. This one's nice and easy. So as far as getting this mounted up, it's a pretty small footprint, and generally these are going to go in the engine bay. On Wranglers, a lot of times you can mount them kind of behind the bumper. There's a little plate there that you can drill that in, and that's not a bad place to do that. The engine bay here is a little bit tight, so another option that you can do is on a fuse cover. We have our fuse panel here. You can use this to kind of mount it up, and it should clear the hood, and then it makes a lot of the connections pretty easy because it's right here. So more than likely, I'm going to mount this up here. And then I mentioned that air out line that's going to run inside the vehicle. So let's head inside and I'll show you the other components. To get the vehicle to slow and stop as you apply the brakes on the RV, that air pressure is going to send from the main unit eventually to this push connect fitting on our cylinder. And this is the physical way that the brakes are applied. So we have this anchor that's going to be self-tapped into the firewall, and then this bracket's going to clamp around our brake pedal. And so as air pressure is pressed in here, it's going to pull this cylinder, and that's going to bring the pedal closer, bringing the vehicle to a slower stop as you apply those brakes. Also, if the breakaway switch ever pulls, that's also going to apply. What's nice on the Air Force One is this reed switch. This is going to have a magnet inside of it, so as this opens up, it's going to send a signal letting the system know that the brakes are being applied, and eventually these wires will go to our wireless coach link. And this is one of the options you can get with the Air Force One. The other one is a 3-diode LED light, which works fairly well, but the wireless coach link is this box that'll tie into that reed switch and eventually send the signal to a monitor light that's going to sit on the dash on your RV. And I really prefer this over the LED diode indication because this sits on the dash on your RV. You can see it right there. You don't have to look in the camera to see if your brakes are being applied. So as you apply the brakes, this will light up. It'll also tell you if the brakes are dragging or if something happens as far as your breakaway switch going off. It can actually have a buzzer. So if the brakes are applied for, I believe, 10 seconds, this will start to buzz. You can shut that off if you need, but a great quick way to see immediately if your brakes are being applied. Once we get our cylinder mounted up, we'll eventually have these wires, and a lot of that's going to tuck underneath the dash to kind of keep it hidden, and that's where our wireless coach link is going to live. So we have plenty of wire here to make that connection, but this box, once everything's mounted up, we can just simply tuck that up into the footwell out of sight, and that way it's going to stay protected. It's not going to be rattling around in the footwell as well. So now that we kind of went through the components and roughly where they're going to mount up, it's a good time to get those physically mounted, and then we can make all those connections. So I'll go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you how I made those connections, and I'll just give you a few tips and tricks on making sure that they're done properly. Now, when getting your cylinder mounted up, it definitely comes in play to make sure that everything's lined up properly. So what I did on our bracket Included is going to be these longer screws. On the Wrangler pedals, they are pretty thick, and so in order to get these to clamp around, you're going to want to swap them out to these. You can always cut off the excess threads later on, but what we're going to be looking for is to kind of square this up on the pedal, and our anchor bracket that's going to go to the firewall and eventually be self-tapped in. What we're looking for is a pretty straight shot. You want this cable nice and straight, or as close to possible, as much as you can. So I kind of found this spot. I had to cut back some of this plastic here, so just kind of peel back your carpet, take out your floor mats, and then I just trim this out. You can see I put some small little chalk markings here to where I'm going to use a pilot hole to drill those out. So our bracket can really go a bunch of different ways, but without having to cut some of this caulk that they use from the factory, I think this is going to work out pretty well for us. So first thing, I will drill this out. And if you follow and use the same spots that I'm using, you're going to get a pretty good shot of making sure that it's going to be aligned. So we'll go ahead and get some pilot holes drilled. Now with our pilot holes made, we can grab the self-tapping screws that are included in the kit, and we're going to get the outside ones mounted up, and that way our bracket's in place. We're going to wait to put the anchoring one in place until we have the bracket. Now that our bracket is secured, what I'm going to do is there's a grub screw that's on the outside of our anchor. Don't tighten it down all the way. Make sure that your wire is looped. And generally what I like to do is get it pretty close to where you still have some slack once it's mounted up. And you can adjust the tension a little bit easier when adjusting the cylinder. So right now I have it fully back, but I still have some slack. So I'm going to move this back just a hair. And then kind of test fit it here. So it should follow kind of in the middle here. That way you can adjust the pedal mount, and that way you can get that tension dialed in perfectly. So I'm pretty happy with this. I am going to snug up our grub screw. And you don't have to get too crazy here. You're just kind of making this to where it's flush with the side of the metal here. And you do have a little bit of pitch to adjust, which makes it a little bit easier for making sure that that cable's straight. So that's something you're also going to want to take into account. You kind of want the cable to be at a downward angle, but again, as I mentioned earlier, as straight as possible. So with this configuration here, I'm pretty happy with that. So I'll go ahead, I'll get this anchor mounted up. And again, just making sure that you do still have that slack to where it's mounted up. I've adjusted it before with the grub screw and played with the cable, but it does get pretty tight. And I found that it is way easier to adjust it on the pedals. So once you're happy with that, you'll take your anchor and we'll get this lined up. Once you've started it, you don't have to completely tighten it. Now's a good time to take your bracket and you'll slide it over the studs. And then get your nuts in place, and we'll just kind of snug this down to where it'll kind of lightly hold it on the pedal. Finger tight these on, and just make sure that that plate is nice and sandwiched, and then evenly tighten it. And again, we're not getting too crazy here as far as tightening goes. But it should kind of at least self-support itself, but still allow you to lightly move it back and forth. So if you need to, you can kind of loosen that up as necessary. And once you're happy with that, tighten in place. You can see our cable is a pretty straight shot towards the firewall. And you do want to pitch it to where it's going to kind of be at an angle aiming down towards there. The reason being is as the pedal pushes, it does kind of swing towards it. So what you can do to really get it perfectly dialed in is push the pedal and then hold the cylinder portion, and that's going to keep it in that straight line. So when it's pulling, you want it to be obviously at a spot that cable's straight, not kinked. And pretty happy with that. So what you're going to also look for is a little bit of looseness in the cable. You don't want it too tight because then it's going to want to pull the brake pedal at all times. So this little bit of play here is actually perfect. And if I needed more, I can just move this forward a little bit. But kind of holding this in place, I'm going to tighten down these nuts just by hand to kind of hold it. And then you're going to want a thin wall, deep 10mm socket. And I'm just going to tighten back and forth. So I'll start on one side, go to the other in a crisscross pattern. And this is something, once you actually have the system installed and use it a few times, you may want to come back and just check to make sure, because as this pulls, there's a decent amount of tension there, and it's possible it can slightly loosen. So the main thing is it's actually actuating the brake. So just tighten as necessary. And once you get those snug down, you do want to test to make sure, again, that angle is going to be a proper one. So it does look like it's pretty aggressive, but as you see, as I push the pedal, it starts to kind of get it aligned a little bit better. In fact, I might lower down my cylinder just a hair here. So I'll loosen it back up, play around with it until you're happy. Should be a nice straight shot there when you're done. And then that's really going to do it for mounting of the cylinder. So it is tight under here. Something that I've done on Wranglers before. You can remove the seat if it, you know, if you're struggling to get some space in here. But just take your time. Now, I haven't mounted everything up, but I've made my connections. And to trace this, we're going to start inside and kind of work our way towards the front of the vehicle. So off of our reed switch, there's two different colors. There's a brown and a blue. And if you follow along in the instructions, they're not very clear, but this is the proper way to get them in place. So you'll take your blue wire and you're going to connect that to the red wire from the transmitter. That's going to use just a blue butt connector. You have the brown wire, and this is going to go to power, 12-volt power. So at some point, you're going to need to run your 1/4-inch airline tube into the firewall, and I'll show you that grommet a little bit later. But you also want to grab the length of red wire that's included and run that in, and that'll eventually make its way to the battery. So you're going to attach that brown wire to the power wire that's going to run through the firewall. And we then have the white wire from the transmitter. I mounted up a ring terminal and used a factory bolt that's kind of underneath the dash and just tighten that down with the ring terminal. And that's going to be all of our connections. So pretty easy, but make sure that you do follow along with that configuration just to make sure that it's proper. Now, speaking of routing that out to the firewall, let's hop in the engine bay. We can continue the routing and I'll show you that grommet. Now that grommet, if you follow along, I pulled the airline tube and our red wire that I passed through. The grommet is just a plastic cap that twists into place. I drilled a hole through that and ran those through. The wire loom is just to kind of make it a little bit cleaner. And from there, I routed across the back of the firewall, and that's where we see that I plugged that 1/4-inch airline tube into the air out. And here's our red wire. And this is where we start to make a few more connections. So let's see where they all connect. That red wire just continues on, and I spliced that in. My wire is pink, but this is the orange wire from our breakaway switch. I extended the wire. I don't have any orange, but that's going to come from that breakaway switch, make its way up, and then splice into here before going to a fuse holder. And I recommend not putting your fuse in place until you have everything hooked up. And then I just attach that to the positive terminal on our battery. So that's how we get our 12-volt power. Now, while we're here on our main unit, there's going to be two black wires. The black wire that we have is going to just connect to the black wire from our breakaway switch. So you'll be running up that orange and black at the same time. I did have to extend that wire. So that's what we have here. And then the other black wire is just this wire that runs to a factory ground. So pretty easy there. Now you'll see the butt connectors that I use may be different than what you have in your kit. In fact, they will be. These are ones that we have here at the shop that we like to use inside of engine bays because there is water potential to get into those connections and break them down. So these heat shrink butt connectors are a great way to make sure that they're sealed up. So you'll see I have a yellow one here and a blue one here. I'm going to take my heat gun, shrink those down, and it's going to create a nice watertight seal. Now I mentioned those breakaway switch wires that are the orange and black. Mine's pink here. But I routed those up along with the air in 1/4-inch airline tube. I use wire loom. It makes it a lot easier to pass everything up. Now, since you're going through the engine bay, stay away from the belts or anything moving as far as suspension or anything that can get hot. And that just routes down. I kind of fed it through here, and you can use a spare airline tube if you have it as a pull wire to kind of feed that through, tape up your wires and pull it in. And then from here, you can just see this is where those wires go back down here. I just kind of zip tied this all up. So pretty easy there. That covers our air in. Our air out was from our cylinder, and then that's going to be the electrical. We have one more connection that we do need to make, and that's going to be the barb fitting that's on the vacuum portion. And this is going to go to our brake booster. Pretty easy here. You're going to grab the large diameter hose, and all of these connections are going to be really tricky to slide them in. So what I recommend using is a little bit of silicone spray. Makes it a lot easier. You can use soapy water, whatever you have to lubricate that. Otherwise, you're going to be fighting them. So we made our way first by putting a one-way check valve. So the one-way check valve is to make sure that it's not pulling from the crankcase or anything like that, and we're making proper flow of the air. So you want to make sure the black portion is facing towards the main unit. From there, I continued my hose over, trying to stay away from the turbo and anything hot, and made my way over to where our factory brake booster is. And tying into the booster line, what I did is you try to find a straight path of it, and this goes down and curves. So before it, as it curves down, I cut that and rotated this. And all we're trying to do is tee into the factory connection, and we also use a one-way check valve. So if we just follow the factory line here, I connected, looped it, and then the one-way check valve, make sure the black is facing towards the engine so we're not pulling from the crankcase. So that completes the loop for our factory. We have our T in line here, and that just loops back and eventually makes our way back to that barb fitting. Make sure that when you're sliding this onto that factory hard line, you kind of really make sure it's got enough on there to get a hose clamp and tighten those down so they stay in place. Once you have that all tidied up, really all that's left to do is zip tie up the wires, make it look nice and clean, get everything mounted up properly, and then if you've worked on your base plate, you can go ahead and get your bumper put back on. If you want to, you can test your module that's going to go on the dash of your RV. So you can put your fuse in place, and what you'll do is push the brake pedal, slide the cylinder back to get that reed switch to pick up, and just make sure that monitor is plugged into a 12-volt cigarette lighter, and that should kick on. If not, you may need to adjust that reed switch, but if everything's working properly, you've officially installed the vehicle side of your Air Force One. We're going to get our RV side done, and something that I'll preface is if you have a newer coach that already has an air fitting, it's very possible that you already have a tank installed. So as newer ones are coming out, they have things called brake sync. There's a few other names that they use. So look for an air fitting on the back. And a lot of times that's going to be a good sign. And if that's the case, you won't have to worry about installing anything here. You do need to make sure that you get the proper connection hose, but you can buy the second vehicle kit of the Air Force One, which is just going to be the vehicle side. But if you don't have this air fitting, we're going to be getting this installed, and really all it's going to come down to is making sure that we have air running through this line when we apply the brakes on the coach, and that means that we do need to tie into the supplied air as well as the metered air to get that to work. So let's head underneath and I'll show you exactly how I ran it. It is going to be specific to the coach that you have. Ours today is a Winnebago Forza, which is on a Freightliner XCS chassis. It's the 340 model. So yours is going to look like this underneath more than likely. But if yours is different, the instruction manual is pretty good about laying out the different manifolds that you'll be tying off of. And really you're just looking for two lines and really mounting up a tank. So on ours today, what I did is I found our manifold, and it's bolted up into the frame. And as far as getting your tank mounted up, you want it nice and secure. There's not a whole lot of great spots on this, so I ended up trimming our bracket to give us a little bit of clearance, and I used the same bolts to mount that back up where the manifold is. So we're just right ahead of the rear axle. Here's our manifold, and that's kind of what you're going to look for anyway, because your air lines will come off of that. So look for this area. It's kind of in between your airbags. And as I mentioned, our tank, I mounted it up to where we have our fittings facing towards the back. It makes it a little bit easier of a run. and I just utilized the same bolts up there. So I did trim that bracket just using an angle grinder to give us that clearance, but it's nice and solid mounted up there. And the two different sides of the tank, you'll see on this side, we have a reducer. This is going to be where we feed this to the supplied air and then also back to the back of the coach to get to our fitting. The other side is going to be our supplied air. So let's take a look at that first, and I'll show you exactly where it goes. In your kit, you're going to have this large T, and you'll see that this is a large diameter push connect fitting on both sides, and then it reduces down to the 1/4-inch airline tube. So all that extra airline that you had from your vehicle, you're going to be using it now underneath the RV, so you can go ahead and grab that. And we need to cut the factory supply line, and so I recommend, just as we used for cutting any of our airline tubes, a set of tubing cutters really comes in handy here to get a nice clean cut. That hose is not very flexible, and a lot of times it's pretty tight to be able to get this to slide in, so this is definitely going to come in handy. Something else that I'll also recommend is these lines will get kind of some buildup on it, and that's going to cause it to not seat up as well and potentially have air leaks. So what I recommend doing is getting a little bit of brake cleaner, spraying that on a rag, and wiping the ends of the airline once you make that cut. Now, we're essentially going to cut the line, put this in place, but as you cut that main supply line, all that air is going to rush out. So don't be surprised when you cut that line, you're going to have air burst out, that pressure is going to drop, and then you'll be good to go. As far as getting to that line, it's kind of tucked up there, but I'll show you where it's at. Up in the frame, you'll see way up top here, there's a large diameter green hose. And it should be the same size as that push connect fitting. So I went ahead and cut that, put that in place, then put our 1/4-inch airline tube and ran that down to the supply side on our tank. Now, again, be careful cutting this. You want to make sure it's on a straight run. That way you're not having a kink in that line, because that can definitely cause an air leak. Now, as far as the metered air, we're also tying into that. So on ours, on that same manifold where the supply is, you'll see a fairly large diameter black hose. It looks to be maybe 1/2 inch or something along those lines. So we illuminated this so you can see a little bit better, but so that main supply line that we tied in is right here. And then going down from the manifold, you'll see this kind of 45 and a slightly larger diameter black hose. I think it's 1/2 inch. It's larger than a 1/4 inch, but this is where I tied in. I just found the nice straight run before cutting and putting that in place, and then this just routes over, and you're going to want to make sure that you're putting it into this reducer, not the far end, because that's going to be our supply to the back. So just make sure you're putting in that push connect fitting. The line will slide in there. There's a little ferrule that'll slide over, and just like any push connect fitting, push it in. You should get a little resistance, and then push a little further, should lock it. Give it a quick tug just to make sure that it's nice and tight. And then from here, once you have those connections made, this little 90, this is where we're going to run the rest of our line back to our air fitting that's going to hook up to our towed vehicle. Best way to do this is just route it along the frame rail, zip tying it up along any wiring that's there from the factory, some wire loom to keep it away from anything hot or moving. Now, running that airline back, as I mentioned, I just followed the frame rail. I went on the passenger side. There's some nice channeling that you can run it through. There's holes in the frame, and there's also plenty of wire loom to zip tie it up. So just going to do that occasionally to make sure that it's in place. And then I just made my way back here. Before coming back to this cross member and our hitch, from here I just looped this over, and then I mounted our air fitting on our driver's side. And generally you're going to want to mount it on the same side that you've mounted it on your towed vehicle, so that way you're not crossing over. You can use self-tapping screws, you can drill it out and use the included bolts if you want, but pretty easy from here. You just get that push connect fitting in, and that's going to do it. So once you get that all installed, you're going to want to hop back in the RV, let it run for a little bit, and make sure you can't hear any audible leaks. So once you get that air pressure up to the normal PSI, you can shut it off. And you're going to want to check for leaks using soapy water. So any connection, just spray those down and look for any large air bubbles forming. If you have that, you're going to want it to either recut or at least try to reseat on the push connect fitting. And keep in mind there's obviously pressure on like the supply line, so you might want to bleed that pressure out just by undoing the fitting before trying to redo it. But from here, we're pretty well good to go to hook up our vehicle. Our final step is going to take our coily air hose here. Push connect's going to go onto our towed vehicle. So as you apply the brakes on the RV, have someone check the towed vehicle to make sure that pedal's actuating properly. Another way to check is also going to be to plug in your wire's coach link monitor. It's just going to go into a cigarette style 12-volt outlet, and it should apply as you apply the brakes. You also want to hold on it for a little bit and make sure that buzzer kicks on. If you don't want that buzzer, you can just simply turn that off, and then this can mount up on your dash anywhere that's visible. And that was a look at installation of the Air Force One supplemental braking system for flat-towed vehicles on a 2023 Jeep Wrangler.